Hello and welcome. Welcome to our presentation as part of the A4LE Association Days East Conference, Inside the Mind of the Learner. And as part of this presentation, we're going to go inside the mind of the learner to understand a little bit about the perception of safety, in particular, how design can impact perceptions of safety. My name is Mark Lee. I'm a principal at Harriman. We're an architecture engineering firm headquartered in the Northeast. And with me, representing the education studio of our firm, is also Principal Lisa Sawin. Together, we enjoy facility design and share some of the research that we've done in this particular topic. We're going to cover four basic areas in our presentation with you today. The first is why student perception of safety is important. Next, we'll look at what do we mean by safety and what do we mean by security. Next, we'll look at how do we understand the student's perception of safety. And lastly, we'll look at how does the school design enhance perceptions of safety. So why is student perception of safety important? Lisa's going to cover this.
Hello, thank you, Mark. So let's talk about the learner for a minute and how we understand that we learn. So if we look at the learning pyramid, which is our understanding of retaining information and how learners recall what they have learned, we understand that through reading, we retain about 10% information, but through teaching others, about 90%. And the pyramid, or the cone of learning, shows you the different ways to which folks remember the things that they learn, from a more passive approach to a more active approach. And we've understood through the learning pyramid that there are more effective, some ways of learning are more effective than others, and a healthy mix of those really provides in-depth understanding of a subject. But not until recently did we really understand that there's more to it than just how we retain information. We actually need to look at Maslow's pyramid and the idea of the really taking care of the basic needs of the learner before they can even start to retain information or learn. So when we look at Maslow's pyramid, we look at the 5 different layers, and the bottom talks about basic needs. The middle talks about psychological needs, and the top talks about self-fulfillment needs. And the areas that we're really going to talk about today is the foundation of this, taking care of those basic needs, those psychological needs, and the safety and security needs. So really making sure that before we even start to talk about learning, that the learner feels safe and secure. And so what we're going to look at is how this really impacts the well-being of the student, how this perception of safety really talks about how the student conducts themselves, how engaged they are, and all of those put together really impact their academic performance. And we really have to address those 3 in order to see high academic performance. So a study that we looked at was, or an article Texas State Security Center put together, is one of many that really summarizes the importance of this topic. And they were quoted by saying, much research has emphasized the importance of school climate and students' perception of safety. And when we say climate, it's really this understanding of everything that makes up that climate and the space around them that really impacts the perception of safety. And they go on to talk about school climate itself and what makes up school climate. And school climate is shaped by a variety of tangible and intangible elements, including staff and student relationships, institutional environment, organizational structure, institutional practices, values, teaching and learning environment, and safety. And so those areas that we're really going to start to look at today are around the institutional environment and the teaching and learning environment itself.
Next, we'll look at what do we mean by safety and what do we mean by security. And as designers of educational facilities, Lisa and I have facilitated conversations with designers, educators, and public safety officials across the United States. We do this to do several things. One, to share stories, to learn from each other. And through this, we've developed an understanding of what the different strategies are around safety and security. And we'll make a distinction at this point in the presentation. And by that, we'll look first at the left-hand column in the blue circle and really look at items that we define as those that impact the perception of feeling safe in a school. And the first two are related, and that has to do with transparency and visibility, that ability to see within spaces and into buildings. And that has a profound emotional impact in terms of our sense of understanding the spaces we're in and our feeling of safety within those spaces. The next is connectedness, and that really has to do with a social emotional response to a place, and that sense of feeling like it's a place that we feel a connection to. Next is a welcoming, the sense of, does the facility welcome us to be in it and participate in it and claim part of that space as welcoming to us. Also thinking about school attachment, that idea of the pride of ownership, and do students feel an attachment to the facilities? Is it something that they gather a sense of pride in being a part of? Next is a feeling of and perception of safety. And so really that's all about this aspect of safety that we're talking about, but it really translates into this overriding feeling of safety and that perception of being safe in that facility. The next one is trust and agency, which really are built around relationships in the facility itself, and that's come out loud and clear in the conversations that we've had with primarily with educators. This idea that that climate, that culture of trust and agency is really critical in the sense of students' perception of feeling safe in a school. And finally, daylight as part of one of the aspects that impacts our emotional well-being within space and our perception of the safety of a space, and the idea of light and natural light and connectedness to the natural environment. So now we'll shift over to the right-hand column, which defines some of the strategies that we put in place, the physical strategies that we put in place to secure buildings, to harden them or to make them more secure at their boundaries. The first we look at is a single point of entry, that is having a primary and well-defined entrance into the school. Next looks at policies, that there are policies in place for first responders and for occupants of a building should there be an incident, and what to do once there is an incident and notification of an incident. Next, related to the policies is those practices, the following through on those, and having drills, understanding who needs to do what at certain points in time. And we look at this as developmentally a range of different practices. The responses for young learners is very different than those for older learners or high school students. Next, we look at coverings for areas that have transparency. There are times where we don't want facilities to have a sense of transparency into those, and we want to control that visibility. And we do that largely through window coverings. One of the things that we also are practicing in some of our designs is this area of demarcation that indicates you cannot see into a space. And so we may change the color of a tile or use other means so that occupants in a room know when they're out of the line of sight. We also look at layers of access, and that is creating zones that have boundaries, and that these successive rings or boundaries provide opportunity to slow a intruder into a building. And so this idea that we provide more time for first responders to arrive and at a scene. part of that is controlling access into those layers. And so we can secure an area and regulate who is coming and going from that layer. Next, we look at closed circuit television or security cameras in a facility. Oftentimes, again, it relates to a perception of safety, but we can use those to monitor an activity either in real time or as a follow-up to an incident. Finally, we consider a couple of strategies that are common practice in securing buildings, and that is mass notification or communication throughout the facility. The ability to notify occupants if there's an incident, and even to be able to send different messages to different areas of a building so that the responses can be tailored to exactly where they are and what the potential threat may be. And lastly, what we call oftentimes panic buttons, the ability for someone to easily and quickly initiate a response. Some things fall within both that safety and the security realm, and those are inside of both circles, and those are training. Again, sort of that aspect of policies and practices, but really doing that as both an aspect of security, but also people feeling safe because they know what to do in the event that something happens. Having administrative presence in a space, having someone who's a trusted leader that has eyes on the space and can act in an incident. Having wayfinding, which is the ability to understand where you are in a facility and where you're going or how to get someplace. And that can be both a physical aspect of the building design as well as the perception of how that translates into your ability to navigate through the facility. And finally, defined private and public spaces. This idea of understanding where it's okay for public to be and understanding who is not in the right place if you see them in a private area. So next we'll look at how do we understand students' perception of safety.
Thank you, Mark. So we really wanted to take a look at this idea of taking care of the basic needs of the students. We know at the heart of it, we have to make sure that they feel safe, that they perceive that they are safe within their school. And as school designers, we want to understand what can we do in these spaces or series of spaces to help foster that perception of safety. So what better way to really understand that than engage the students? So we were working on a design of a high school, and we engaged the students from that high school, and you can see the demographics here on the screen to get a sense as to where the high school is located. It's located in Auburn, Maine, the population and different facts about the area. But then we met with this group of students who were really engaged in multiple levels of the design. They also worked with us to really talk about things they would like to see in the building and did different design shreds with us. But we had a specific series of workshops on this idea of safety and security. And so we led two Q&A sessions, two exercises, if you will. One was the whole group together, and we asked them what comes to mind when you hear the word safety, and really a brainstorming session. And several words came out, some louder than others. You can see the words on the left-hand side, and words like welcoming, open, comfortable, familiar, protection, locks, and clean came to the forefront. But we also wanted to see what happened when we asked students individually. So we wanted to make sure there wasn't a peer sort of influence. And so we did individual surveys to ask the students what came to mind when they hear the word safety. And 27% reported protection, feeling protected. 21% said comfortable. Welcoming was next. And then next to that were familiar and clean. So really these ideas of more about how they perceive, they feel in the space, more so than the idea of locks. But then we asked them, what comes to mind when you hear the word security? And so you can see that the responses now have shifted more towards the idea of police or SOR presence, locked watch entrances, organized, and unsolicited. They made the same conclusion that we did of security supports safety. So we found that really interesting. And so then we did the same thing where we asked them individually, what comes to mind when you hear the word security, to see if there was any major shifts from what we heard in the group. And again, officers and guards and SRO were at the top of the list with 24%, watch locked doors. But then it started to talk about organized and the organization of the space and things within the space, and then protection and trusting people are there to help. So talking about those relationships with others. So from there, we wanted to dig a little bit deeper and really look at, some of the research was telling us about how the climate impacted the students. And so we wanted to understand different levels of that. And that was how connected they felt to other students in their school. And then we asked the question about how connected they feel to teachers in their school, what level of safeness do they feel, and what level of security do they feel. And it was interesting, the number one on the slider, you can see it was between 1 to 10, and there's an average of about 6.7 was the response for they felt most engaged with the students or connected with the students in the school, and not too far behind that, the teachers. But then as we got down into the how safe do you feel and what level of security do you feel, they felt much lower on the sliding scale. So we wanted to understand from them what spaces evoked a perception of safety. And so we put together a series of images and presented those to the students, and you'll see those on the next screen here. And looked at some of the major spaces in a school, and really just wanted the students' gut reaction when they look at these two images. Which of those evokes a sense or feeling of safety? And 95% of those asked gravitated towards the one on the left. And they gave reasons such as open, more open and accessible, more open, colorful, and inviting. Some said it was too open. So that was probably the 5% that felt that it felt like a prison or looks like a prison on the right-hand side, not as open.
The next space we looked at was the cafeteria. And likewise, we showed two very different images of spaces. One space on the left-hand side had large openings, windows, had a variety of seating, and had tall ceilings in them, and a variety of finishes as well. And then the other one we showed them was a very uniform finish in the walls. All the furniture was the same. There was no access to views or light from the outside. And there was some level of treatment of the ceiling, but it was a fairly uniform height ceiling and a low ceiling space. And here, overwhelmingly, again, there was a clear direction of students' perception of which felt safer, and that was the image on the left. Comments received were that it had multiple levels. There was more natural light in seating space. Again, more light and higher ceilings, and so it felt safer.
The next space we looked at was the gymnasium. And so presenting two images, one on the left-hand side and one on the right-hand side. And when the students were asked which space do they perceive to feel safe in, 100% of those gravitated towards the image on the left-hand side, using words such as slick, bigger, color on sides, and has places to sit. So from some of those responses, we're starting to see that they are gravitating towards wanting to be in that space. The one on the right, they kind of struggled to figure out what it exactly is used for. And it wasn't quite clear on it's clearly a gymnasium, but what type of gymnasium? What is it? Is it a practice court? Is it a backup court? So 0% felt connected to that image.
The one that we really enjoyed reviewing was the hallway or corridor. And again, what we did was we chose two very distinctive corridor types. These actually happen to be in the same facility. So that was also kind of an interesting aspect of it. But the characteristics of them are remarkably different. And so one is, the one on the left is simply a block corridor, block lined corridor, uniform lighting, uniform height, concrete floor finish. And then the one on the right-hand side has seating in it to invite people to sit down. It has different textures of the flooring, different colors, and then the ceiling has different volumes in it. And there's wayfinding and signage and transparency in it. And not surprisingly, the one on the right is the one that students overwhelmingly considered to be the safer corridor. It felt modern and cozy and welcoming, where the old one, or the one on the left rather, felt like old school corridor, the sort of institutionalized corridor, and maybe perhaps similar to what they currently have in their existing 1960s vintage high school.
And so then we started to look at the classroom and looking at the image on the left-hand side and the right-hand side. And 98% of the students gravitated towards that image on the left-hand side. Starting to note things such as fire stools. So it was a type of furniture that they were familiar with and gravitated towards. A lot of glass. So again, this idea of the connection, the daylight, more engaged learning. So by the setup within the classroom, the arrangement of furniture, the flexibility of that, they immediately saw that as a way to be more engaged in learning and having that variety versus the image you see on the right-hand side. They felt that it was dated and definitely didn't feel safe or gravitate towards that space. The interesting part with a lot of these images is the ones that most of the students are gravitating towards, really you hear the same words that come up when we ask them that perception of safety. So it's this idea of openness, welcoming, clean, comfortable. So it's definitely interesting as we went through the study to see those feelings and words come up in a lot of the spaces that they perceived or they felt safe in.
And we next looked at a library and provided distinction of images there. These ones are a little closer in range, where they both have large fenestration with access to views to the outside, and then the arrangement of tables for students to sit at. And so, not surprisingly, we have a little more nuanced result in it. However, we still have a overriding majority favoring the one on the right, and with comments such as nice light. They could actually see moving and changing the seating, and they like the windows.
So then we realized that essentially we could break this down into two areas, process and practice. And so really the process looks at, as we're going through the design, the process of creating these spaces is engagement of all stakeholders, most importantly, the students. Engage them multiple times throughout the process to really get their feedback and their perception on these spaces and how these spaces are going to make them feel, because ultimately we're designing these spaces for them to really thrive as learners. And then use visual examples to communicate the concepts. So the process of really being able to pull out this information and this understanding from the students, we needed to be able to show them the spaces that we couldn't necessarily take them to, but in contrast, another space, and really be able to get that that response from that imagery. And then clearly distinguish between safety and security, that as we go forward, that there is a clear distinction, not only us as designers perceive that, but also the occupants, specifically the students, understand that clear delineation between this idea of safety and that security is really supporting safety.
We next turn to the idea of practice. And so what are the different things that we really consider in the practice of these principles that we're exploring? And there's two primary aspects to that practice. One, that safety and well-being are different than security. And sometimes, again, we've been making this point throughout, that oftentimes we sort of lump them together. Oh, it's safety and security, but really we're trying to make a very strong distinction between what we mean by safety and the perception of feeling safe, and well-being. And as we saw on the pyramid of needs, how those are really, really important in the social and emotional well-being of individuals, and how that's different from those physical security strategies that we put in place that support the sense of being safe. The second one is that design matters, and intentionally creating spaces that foster these ideas of feeling safe, and what underlines those. And that includes comfort and warmth, welcoming, openness and brightness, familiarity, cleanliness, social engagement, trust, agency, this connection to the natural environment, and transparency. All those things that we've talked about, but that we can actually start thinking about as design practitioners, incorporating into our designs. And so that's what we're going to look at next, in terms of how do we then use this in a case study as we employ these design concepts into this environment. So the first one we look at is the student commons, and so this is a space that resides at the heart of the high school. And in fact, the main entrance is sort of over on the left-hand side, middle of the screen, and it's really the first space that you walk into, and it really becomes the sort of social hub, if you will, of the whole school. And so some of the design considerations that we employed in this space were really ensuring that it felt bright, open, and airy. And again, those are immediate feedbacks we heard from students in some of those examples that we shared with them. The sense that it's student focused, that this is their space in the school, we felt was critically important. In fact, the very name of it, the Student Commons, really underlies that point. The idea also that it's kind of like a food court where students feel very comfortable, that they have choice in where they are and what they see and do, and how they socialize within that space. We also, you can see rising up from the middle of the screen is a community stair that provides that place for a more intimate social connection that feels less institutional, and provides differentiation in terms of where they are within this space itself. You can see on the right-hand side, there's a large window that connects to a courtyard, and behind the scene here also is another large curtain wall that has views out to the natural environment. And those are critically important as well, in terms of fostering that sense of really the biophilic design, or this idea of connecting to the natural environment. And then we also have multiple scales. That was really important for us. There's satellite seating up on the top of the community stair, and then there are various nooks within this open space to provide a variety of seating types and scales. How that translates into the design strategies, or safety strategies rather, really thinking about daylight, the social emotional connectedness, transparency, this sense of pride of ownership, that the space really belongs to the students, and also this idea of trust or agency, that the students are trusted within the space on their own, and that really that we really empower them to make good decisions. But we also have those security strategies underlying all aspects of the space as well. And this one, we have layers of access control. So we have We have pocket doors that can close off the space from the rest of the circulation. In the event of an incident, we have controlled access into this space, both from the circulation as well as from the outside. We do have closed circuit cameras that capture aspects in the space. And then we also have mass notification or PA within the space in order to communicate as needed.
And the next space that we looked at were the classroom communities. And so these are another real student-owned space. But the way the school is set up is there's a clear distinction between the classroom side and the more public side of the building. But the classrooms themselves all kind of come off of the classroom node right here that you see in this image. So the design considerations that we looked at were student-owned collaborative work social space. So this idea that this is really owned by the students to have a collaborative area where they can work together in small or large groups, this idea of really having this flexible furnishing. But it was also a social space. The kids, when we engaged them in the first design series, really talked about lockers and no longer wanting the lockers. They didn't use them, they didn't have time to get to them, but there's still that social aspect of the locker. And so we wanted to be able to still provide some day lockers for some students that may still want them, but not necessarily pepper the hallways with a locker for every student, and bring that day locker adjacent to this student-owned collaborative space. So we really start to foster, excuse me, a spot within the classroom community for interaction, social engagement, and learning from one another. It also helped us really break down the idea of the corridor and not really have it's a non-corridor structure, if you will. So there's different corridors that come into this, but it really disrupts that. So you know something different is happening here. They gravitate towards this spot. They also have that adjacency of two spaces next to it, where in the far image, you can see a green surround around a door, and that is the faculty work area. So the faculty could be working in there, but still have visual connection to the students out in this space. So if a student does need additional help from a faculty member, they can be able to access them in that area. And then also there's this first administration in this building. So the other area to the left is where the assistant principals are. So they can have access to a mentor or somebody to talk with. And those doors were always indicated to be on magnetic hold opens by the staff so that they could maintain an open door policy. But that and the color and the materiality really show that something different is happening here. The other design consideration was daylight in connection to views. So making sure that there's that connection to the natural world. And there's several studies that show the benefit of daylight for students, as well as views to the natural world. So then we looked at the safety strategies. And so what does this space, what opportunities does it provide to really look at this perception of safety? What can we do to make it feel safe? And so really focusing on this social emotional connectedness, this space provides the students a place to really be able to foster those skills, as well as connect with their peers and the adults within the building, and foster that those relationships. Make sure it's welcoming. Make sure that as students approach this feels like a welcoming place for them to pull off. They understand that between the disruption in the hallway, as well as the movable furniture, but then also the selection of materials, the nice warmth of the wood ceiling, as well as the pop of color, make it feel welcome. Transparency both inside and outside, so transparency to those adjacent spaces of support, as well as the transparency out of the building, really helps students understand where they're at within the building, what is happening just beyond where they are. school attachment and pride of ownership. So providing a space the students are proud of. They'll take care of it. They have agency within this space, and lots of great things happen when you show the students that you trust them with a space, which leads right into the trust and agency. Wayfinding. It's really important that there's a lot of talk about organization and familiar. So making sure that it's easy to kind of wayfind through the space. This is one of the wayfinding elements in the school. So on any of the floors, the students understand that this, between the color and the materiality, they understand where they are, which classroom node they're in within the building. And then really fostering those relationships, as we talked about before, having that administrative presence and having access to their teachers. So then what security strategies did we layer on top of that to support this perception of safety? Layers of access. So there are layers of access as well as access control. So making sure where this is located within the building. As we talked before, there's a separation between sort of the private, the more classroom side, and the public side. There's many layers in order to get back to this portion of the school. The access control, that only certain folks have access to this area. There's closed circuit TV, as well as communication, again, that define public and private. The administrative presence. So that also is one of those things that is between shared between safety and security. It's the perception of safety, but it also the security of that, making sure that they know somebody is there for them. That was one of the clear things in security that we heard from the students. Wayfinding is another one of those items. And then panic button. We have panic buttons located in spaces just off of this, and those are strategically placed in the same place on all the floors so that folks know where they can go to in the event of something happening to notify the authorities.
Next space we'll look at really is also connected to that student common area, and it's really the learning commons, the library, also positioned at the and sort of an area that is very accessible to both public and students, but it's one where students pass by frequently throughout the day. And you can see from the entrance that that there's sort of an invitation to really have sort of students participate, be able to see into it and engage with it. The design considerations that we had in designing the Learning Commons were ensuring that it felt bright, open, and airy. And so just through the doors here, it opens up to a tall volume space with large windows out to the courtyard. And so again, it feels very warm, welcoming, and inviting, and bright and airy. It's student focused, and that is important in terms of where we placed it, but also really thinking about all aspects of it. And in fact, when you come into the space, the circulation desk is actually remote from the front door, and that is to really create a sense that that you're not necessarily being monitored as you come into the space itself. That sense of that it's very comfortable for the student to come in. That it's really set up for them. The next really important thing we heard as feedback was a sense of this space feeling more like a cafe or Barnes and Noble, where food and drink are allowed, and that again has to do with this idea of really changing the notion of what the space is and who it belongs to. There's connection to the natural environment. As I said, there's a large window as you come through the space out to the courtyard, which lets in natural light, and you have views to plantings in the courtyard itself. There are a variety of student collaboration spaces. What we took from the student feedback and what we understand that a variety of types of furniture and spaces works for different types of tasks and also for different types of learners. And so the concepts of really ensuring that we have lots of different, a variety of these things to support students was critically important. Next is really thinking about its location, as we've mentioned, that it's their part of this main street or this common area throughout in the building itself. And then looking at safety strategies, these are largely the similar ones that we've talked about in some of the other ones, including daylight and welcoming transparency, that sense of pride of ownership that comes from really giving students agency and responsibility and that they own the space. But that trust extends all the way to the idea of allowing food and drink into the facility itself or into the learning commons. And lastly, this aspect of social emotional connectedness that is fostered from inside of this. That it's really set up not just for the formal learning and resource materials, but it's actually designed around promoting social emotional connectedness, informal socialization within the space itself. And those same security strategies that we've seen employed in some of the other spaces in the school were important here as well.
So the next space we looked at were the educational spaces. And so as you can see from this image, there's a lot of connection to the outdoors and natural light. There's also a lot of flexibility in this space with the overhead power, tables that can move around. And what you can't see here, there's actually multiple teaching services within the room, as well as connection to the hallway itself. So the design considerations that we looked at were that connection to the natural environment, so that the students are able to look outside, look at nature. There's a lot of studies that talk about just within 40 seconds of just looking out the window at the natural environment, how calming it can be, so that students feel relaxed, they feel safe, they can be open to learning. Collaborative furniture, so being able to adapt the space to whatever learning style or activity that is going on. Multiple presentation surfaces and orientations, making sure it's just not one front of classroom, that really the whiteboards are on multiple surfaces or even mobile within the space, so that the instruction or coaching, if you will, can happen anywhere or by anyone in the space. And then putting learning on display. So making sure there's not only a place for the students to exhibit their work so that they can share with other students, but having a visual connection into the space so that other students can get excited and curious about what students are learning, and they can figure out how to get engaged in that as well. So the safety strategies that we looked at were this idea of daylight, making sure that there's plenty of natural light within the space, which was then followed by social emotional connectedness. This idea of the collaborative furniture really allows students to be able to engage with their peers and develop those skill sets around social emotional learning. And this idea of transparency, really allowing both transparency outside, but transparency within the classroom and out into the halls. So giving that sense of understanding your surroundings, what's happening, and then a clear definition between private and public. And so this is definitely one of the more private sides of the school, separation from those areas that are more public within the school, and more remote from there. So the security strategies that support the safety strategies and the design considerations that we were looking to achieve were, again, the layers of access. So there's several layers that we set up within the approach to safety and security. And this is, there's several layers that you have to get through in order to get to the classroom itself. Access control, so understanding that not everybody can get back into the space within the building when different areas are locked off. And then audio notification and communication. So not only being able to communicate and be able to communicate messages to the students, but also looking at being able to communicate different things to different areas within the school, depending on what they need to be made aware of. Window coverings, being able to control when people can see into the space. And then the no vision zone demarcation, so making sure that when students are in this space and there is an event happening in the hallway, or there's a lockdown drill and they want to get out of the line of the sight of the hallway, there's a clear delineation by a change in material. And so the flooring might be usually gray in one area, and where you can't be seen from the hallway, we've changed the color of the floor tiles so students know immediately where to get in the classroom to be out of the line of sight. And so this graphic really looks at the safety measures that we use to support this idea, the security measures that we use to support this idea of safety. And this is really looking at the client's policy and procedure around safety and security, and then understanding the student's perception of safety and what are those security measures, such as layers of access, access control, secure vestibules, really panic buttons within the school, and a myriad of other things that many designers are doing today to make sure that we create these buildings as secure as possible. But it's equally important that we understand how we design these spaces so that the students and the faculty perceive that they are safe, and then have the security measures that support that safety.
So just kind of an overview and conclusion of our material today. We wanted to share these aspects with you. One that we really the design for schools that we design schools for learning and safety. This idea that that learning happens when the students feel well connected and safe in their environment, and that's when and that's where the research has pointed us to, and so it's really trying to uncover or really dig a little deeper into this idea of how can we improve their sense of feeling safe in the school environment. And that really leads to the second one, which is there's a difference between safety and security, that the ideas of security aren't necessarily one and the same of safety, that the ideas of the strategies around security support the perceptions of safety. One of the big takeaways I think that Lisa and I really enjoyed as part of our delve into this topic was really that aspect of engaging students to understand their perceptions of safety, and that's sort of why we're designing these spaces. And so I think it's really important to gain their perspective of these aspects of safety and security. And the next is that design matters, to intentionally create spaces that foster a perception of safety. We really hope that you've enjoyed our presentation. We continue to look for ways to collaborate with other designers and with educators in understanding the ways in which you've employed some of the design strategies and safety and security practices that we've talked about today. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.